movie Drive, released in 2011, directed by Nicholas Refn and starring Ryan Gosling, is not only an important piece of cinema due to its beautiful cinematography and well-written screenplay, but also because it's one of the most notable and influential films of recent years to feature a synthwave soundtrack. Synthwave is a microgenre of music inspired by the synth-heavy movie and video game soundtracks of the late 80s and early 90s. It relies heavily on the sense of nostalgia surrounding the 80s tropes of bright neon colors, action-heavy films, arcade games, and so much more. While already being its own microgenre, synthwave is actually a subcategory of the vaporwave music genre, with vaporwave itself being a subcategory of the EDM genre, while also being the parent of other musical genres such as dreadwave, new wave, and Simpsons wave? No, yeah, that's actually a thing. With millions of views, who watches these? I'm getting off track here. Look, the point is that synthwave and its close relatives are all part of a niche category of music that relies on evoking a sense of nostalgia through imitating an aesthetic from a period that many of its listeners, frankly, never even lived through. And that is exactly why I think synthwave is one of the truest forms of postmodern music. So, here, I'm going to be focusing on three important elements of postmodern media: the pastiches, the hyperreal, and the rabbit holes of self-referential and deep meta worlds that these postmodern media create.
Oh, what is this, some kind of magic act?
First, we'll start with a pastiche. Something that is a pastiche is essentially a parody with the intention of celebrating rather than mocking. The sound of synthwave not only imitates but celebrates a culture that hasn't been around for nearly 30 years. Most cover art for synthwave albums are reminiscent of styles of that era. Take the album Leather Teeth by French synthwave musician Carpenter Brut, for example. Carpenter Brew? Brut? Hey, is it Carpenter Brut or Brew? No, he's French. Why am I lying to you? There's nobody here. I'm alone in a recording booth. Moving on. The cover art of Leather Teeth is reminiscent of a poster for an 80s American slasher flick, with its stylized font, bright pink theme, and cheesy one-liners littered throughout the cover. If that wasn't enough, even the music videos for the album look like footage from those types of movies. This incredibly stylized representation of the 80s and 90s also exemplify the idea of our second aspect of postmodern media, the hyperreal, meaning they represent a self-contained world that recreates an image of a world that never existed. Well, yes, there were films, video games, and a general aesthetic during that time that is similar to what the genre produces. Few were nearly as hyper-stylized or as pervasive as synthwave would suggest. And that just may be a symptom of a larger process. With shows that capitalize on this 80s aesthetic like Stranger Things and This Is Us hitting the mainstream, it's easy to see that synthwave may just be a small part of this hyper-real representation of the 80s that modern pop culture has crafted and sold to a generation who barely, if at all, remembers that era. It's reasons like these that make me truly believe that synthwave is the ultimate postmodern musical genre. Its main goal is to imitate, while also creating, its own version of a genre that's long gone and mostly forgotten. If that's not meta as hell, I don't know what is.